Hi, I'm John DeDakis, and you're one-to-one with me, and I'm one-to-one with Jenna Bourne. There she is. Jenna and
Hello.
hi, we go way back. Let me just tell people a little bit about you. You're an investigative reporter at 10 Tampa Bay. That's the CBS affiliate in Tampa, Florida. And your work has brought about change on the national and state level. The information you sent me did not include all of your awards, so we'll talk
Well,
about
you said
that.
to keep it to 50 words, John.
Well, you left out all the praise of yourself, which shows you're totally humble too.
Yes.
Jenna hosts and writes and shoots and edits the YouTube series What's Brewing. It's an investigative series. We're going to talk about it, take a little look at a clip. Before moving to Tampa Bay, Jenna reported for TV stations in Jacksonville, Florida, Greenville, South Carolina, North
South
Carolina.
Carolina.
As I said, South Carolina. I always get those mixed up. And you did a stint at my hometown of La Crosse, Wisconsin, at what, WKBT, right?
You got it.
And you're also a graduate, a summa cum laude graduate, which is way smarter than me, from the Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. So, Jenna Bourne, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to do it.
Here, people don't know this. We met at CNN when you were an intern,
An
in the
intern.
Situation Room when
Just
I
a little
worked,
baby intern.
and you have been a beta reader for me for some of my novels. You
Mhm.
were very kind to actually write a blurb for one of them. And of course, I write as a woman. And I think one of the things you said is, I don't understand how John DeDakis was able to climb into my head. And the interesting thing is, you probably don't know this, but to a certain extent, my protagonist, Lark Chadwick, she's not you. She's not based on you, because I probably started writing this before you were born, but no pun intended. Uh, um, but you have definitely informed my character. So in many ways, and we're going to be talking about your role as an investigative journalist. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you in this program is that you took one of my writing classes in terms of writing fiction. And
Mhm.
one of the things I teach is interviewing techniques, because writers, I feel, have to have a broad horizon. They can't be just writing in their bubble. They need to know other people who aren't like them. And so as I was talking about this in class, I realized, well, a lot of the tips that I teach, you do. You could actually have taught the class. So I want to talk about interviewing techniques.
Okay.
And but you told me that there's a reason that you wanted to be on this show. So
Yes.
I'll let you go first.
Yes. Well, thank you, John. I love that you are going to be interviewing me about interview techniques. It's very meta. So the reason that when you asked me to do this, I was so excited to do it is I'm a big proponent of transparency, and whether that's government leaders or the media, I think it's important that everyone just be as transparent as possible right now. And especially at a time when there's a lot of distrust of journalists. I think it's so important. The way that we earn the public's trust is through transparency ourselves, and by letting the public into our process and to have a greater understanding of how we do things and why we do things. And so that's why I thought it would be really cool to talk about interviewing techniques, kind of a peek behind the curtain.
Okay, well then, before we talk about techniques, let's dig a little deeper into this transparency thing, because I've always felt that, and maybe you've noticed this as well. I mean, we're living at a time when discourse, especially in social media, is toxic. We're talking past each other, and you get out in the field a fair amount. So, you have probably been on the receiving end of a lot of criticism about fake news. And in my experience, in talking to some of these people, the people who have the most vociferous opinions about fake news and how we do it don't have a clue about how we do it. Is that your experience as well?
I think that's accurate. And I think that what I find is often the people who are quick to call real news fake news are the people who tend to fall for actual fake news the most. people who, feed into and seek out conspiracy theories, and find that to be somehow more comforting. The idea that, oh, everybody's in on it and you're seeing through them, that idea seems to be more comfortable to those people than the idea that it's all random and no one's in control.
Well, so what is your perception of the biggest misunderstanding that people have of journalism?
I think the biggest misunderstanding that I have noticed is I see a lot of people, and I use the term myself too sometimes, people refer to the media. They talk about the media. Don't let the media divide us. And there really is no such thing.
What do you mean?
Well, lumping the media all into one category, it's really challenging because we don't communicate with each other about we don't have every news station and newspaper and network news outlet in the country. We don't have like a big phone call every morning where we talk about our agenda for the day and how we're going to spin stuff.
But okay, devil's advocate. They would say that it's not like it's a conspiracy where you're colluding with each other, but it's a mindset. And the mindset comes with seeds that are planted in journalism schools, that this is the way it's supposed, this is the agenda that you should be pushing. Your professors are liberals, so naturally you've been indoctrinated to the liberal way of doing things. Am I right? Is that what happened at Medill?
No. I can't speak for the network level. My only network experience was when I interned at CNN. And maybe I just wasn't in the room where it happened there. But, I have never known anybody in my 9 years as a working journalist. I have never worked with somebody who, as far as I knew, intentionally tried to spin a story or pursued an agenda. The pursuit that I have consistently seen is the pursuit of truth and context and perspective. I think that the priority for most of the people, at least in local news, because that's really my only experience, is advocating for the community.
All right, I'm going to do a devil's advocate again.
Here we go. I'm ready.
This is interview technique, 101.
I was gonna say
this is the gotcha question.
We'll come back to gotcha questions.
We'll come back to gotcha.
Okay.
The question is there a difference between an agenda and having an opinion?
Yes, absolutely. There's a difference. Well, everybody's a human. Everybody has opinions. Everybody has biases. The difference is, when you have an agenda, you are intentionally shaping your stories and shaping your coverage based on those opinions and biases. The goal of a journalist should be to try to seek truth in spite, be conscious of your own biases and try to seek truth in spite of them.
How do you guard against having your own bias seep into a story?
That's a good question. I think the first step is just kind of awareness, knowing yourself, recognizing, okay, it's okay to feel a certain way about a story, but that you have to just check that at the door. You have to give as much time and attention as you can to uncovering what the facts of the situation are, regardless of how you feel about it. And I think so much of that has to do with the writing as well. Not just the information seeking, but how you present it. Trying to write in a way where you exclude any kind of adjectives that might be editorial.
Give me an example.
Sure. So, I caught myself recently, actually, and this was a pretty minor one. I wrote a line I sent a simple public records request. Simple is a little editorial there. Maybe it's simple to me, but it might not be simple to other people, or if you wrote something like, look at this, waste of taxpayer money. Well, waste is editorial. Instead, the appropriate thing to do would be to say, here's how your tax dollars were spent. on this, on this, on this. And then you can decide whether you think that's wasteful.
Okay. Okay. So is it hard to check your opinions at the door? Is it hard to seek out people you don't agree with? Is it hard to choose the words that are the most accurate but dispassionate, or has that become a rhythm that you work
Yeah,
on?
it's kind of just a rhythm. It's not that hard because it's what I've always done. I think it would be harder if maybe I started out in a different way and was trying to weed that out. But it's kind of just second nature.
Well, and I don't know the answer to this, but one of the things that I noticed when I was teaching as an adjunct at the University of Maryland's journalism school, that there were some students who were actually majoring in editorial writing. And I remember thinking, and I didn't teach any of these kids, but one of the things that I remember thinking is that, before you start spouting your opinion, you need to have some editorial, reportorial chops so that you really know what you're talking about. Because if you're just out of school and already starting to write editorials, then you really are pushing an agenda, right?
Sure, yeah.
Did they have that at Medill as well, editorial writing?
No, I hadn't heard anything about that. Yeah, I mean, it seems odd to want to pursue something like that. I think it would be difficult to want to pursue something like that and then try to transition into impartial journalism. I think that would be really difficult. And I think also to want to do that so young, you just don't have enough life experience to be able to make informed enough opinions about big issues.
Give people a sense of what it's like to be a reporter at a Trump rally and be the recipient of the vitriol and the negativity of the hostility that people have toward journalists. I mean, is it a harrowing experience? And if it is, how, again, do you maintain your objectivity when you're the source of scorn from, the guy at the top?
Well, and I've covered several Trump rallies over the years, and part of really the price of admission there for some of the people who go is to have access to the media. Here I go, using my own word. I tell people not to use. Have access to journalists. Have access to journalists to be able to express some of those views in person. And there is a lot of taunting, a lot of yelling, a lot of vulgar language, a lot of vulgar hand gestures.
Giving you the finger.
Yes, and
you must be tempted to give it back.
No, no. That's not me. But people are entitled to their opinions, and that's not what I'm there for. It's frustrating. I'm there just trying to do my job, but you just can't. It's not personal. It's really not about me. So you just have to remember that and try not to let it get under your skin, and try not to let it distract you from doing the job. I do find that a lot of the people who will turn around and give me the finger or yell obscene things at me in those moments afterward are coming up and wanting to be interviewed about their opinions. And it's that I remember just thinking, well, you can't have it both ways.
Right. There's an incident that I wish you'd tell the story about the time that basically your life was in danger because of an encounter with the Trump campaign in 2016. Do you feel comfortable telling that story?
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief because it's a little long. But I guess the shortest way I can tell it is a couple weeks before then candidate Donald Trump was coming into town, his campaign reached out to my station when I was working in Jacksonville, offering a one-on-one. And I believe they did this with several different news outlets in town. And they asked my station who would be attending the rally and who would do the one-on-one. And my station selected me. And I had a few conversations with the Trump campaign leading up to the rally, just to kind of talk about logistics. On the day of the rally, I was in the car on the way there, and I received a call from the Trump campaign asking for some personal information for a background check, and asking for my questions, what questions I was going to ask. And I told them, as a rule, we do not send questions in advance, but I'm happy to send you some topics I may ask about. You mentioned the gotcha questions earlier. I don't do gotcha questions. If I'm going to ask you a tough question, you will know that topic is coming. There's no point in surprising people if your goal is to get actual information, rather than if your goal is to be dramatic and surprise. If you're pursuing actual information, I'm not going to surprise you with a question out of nowhere that you're not going to know how to answer. So that being said, I sent some topics that I may ask about during our scheduled one-on-one, but did not send questions. And then the Trump campaign ghosted me. I called them repeatedly, saying, hey, when are we going to do the interview? Let me know where to be. And I never heard from them again. And so I tweeted after the rally that the Trump campaign ghosted me on our scheduled one-on-one with candidate Donald Trump after I refused to send my questions in advance. And I had no idea.
It's a statement of fact. And it's a statement of fact.
That was all, and that's all I said about it. That tweet.
Now, is
ghosted
a biased word?
I don't think so. I think it's an accurate word.
Okay, how would you define it?
Ghosting, it's when you are talking to somebody and then you just disappear. Maybe it's a millennial thing.
It's slang. It's slang.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's what happened. We were talking and then they disappeared.
Okay.
So that tweet went viral, and I got some.
How viral did it go?
Oh man, I remember being home that night eating dinner and just looking at my phone, and it was just, I was like, oh, what's happening? Yeah, what's happening? What's happening? And I look, and there's just thousands of retweets, comments. I had no idea. I did not anticipate it was going to blow up like that. And so there were some death threats in there. And mostly, though, what surprised me was how many people were just flat out calling me a liar, saying, you never had an interview set up with Donald Trump. Why would he do an interview with you? You're just a little girl. Just really personal stuff. And I mean, why would I lie about it? Why would I make that up?
You're lying about it because you hate Trump and you want to stick it to him.
I can't help what people's opinions are, but it just seems like it was really striking to me that all these people who didn't know me, have never seen my work, don't know what my history is, were willing to just state as a fact that I was lying and it never happened.
And they were alleging that Trump himself stiffed you, right?
Well, so that I wouldn't say that the people who were responding said that. What happened was several news outlets and non-news outlets as well saw the tweet go viral and wrote about this. And I was really amazed by how few of them actually reached out to me to try to talk to me about what happened. How many of them just took the tweet and ran with it and summarized it incorrectly.
Reputable news organizations?
Yes. Yeah, that was really disappointing. It was really disappointing. And, several of those news organizations said that I tweeted that Trump ghosted me on my interview, that Trump backed out of the interview. And that was not the case. The Trump campaign did. I don't know, but I doubt that Donald Trump knew anything about it. I doubt that he was clued in on all this. I'm I suspect it was his campaign, which is why I didn't write that it was Donald Trump who backed out. I wrote that it was his campaign.
So how did this get resolved? Did it just go away and the next shiny object came along? And
pretty much, I mean, it was a couple days of craziness, and then everyone just kind of moved on.
Which actually raises another question about social media. I mean, Twitter is the platform of choice for the president, and of course, you know, people have told me, well, why do you guys cover his tweets? Well, because he's the president, and what the president says is newsworthy, no matter what it is that he's saying. You don't necessarily have to.
Or on what platform?
Exactly. So, what's it like? I mean, when I was a journalist, it was film, then videotape. We didn't have cell phones. There was no such thing as the internet. What's it like now with, you know, everybody is a journalist. I mean, everybody's got a camera. This has got to be maddening for you, or is it not? Is it just the opposite? It's like, you know, you have access to information that for me was a dream.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it really bothers me. I think that the expectations are a lot higher for journalists now, since you can put out information immediately, and there are multiple different ways to put out information. The pressure is to have it out first, have it out fast, and have it out everywhere. And so what perhaps in the past might have been able to wait until the 11 o'clock news, if you are, you know, 30 seconds late tweeting something, you know, a breaking development, then you're late to the party. And so I think
but who cares? I mean, other than journalists and, you know, the competition, does the guy sitting at home really care if you know, got your tweet out a nanosecond ahead of, you know, the NBC affiliate?
That's a great question. And I think that that's a question more managers within news should be asking themselves.
Oh, you mean there's friction between, you know, management and the reporters in the trenches?
Never.
I'm shocked.
Never. I mean, look, I think that there's always, in every industry, there is kind of that tension between people who are out in the field and people who are not, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, because it sort of speaks against the monolith, though, because, I mean, I've had knockdown, drag out arguments in news. I mean, I think every newsroom has arguments every day about what's news, right? And what to cover.
Absolutely. Multiple times a day. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's healthy. I think it's, you know, you get a lot of different brains with a lot of different experiences and backgrounds, in the same room to talk about what we should cover every day. I mean, that's hugely important, and it should be a lively discussion.
You, as a reporter, have to depend on social media. So I guess my question is, how do you discern the accuracy of what's out there? And is there a corollary as to how a person sitting, you know, at home should evaluate the information they're getting online? Because there's a certain degree of trust and discernment that's involved, but because of so many voices, the cacophony that's out there, how do you discern the difference between what's real and what's not?
I don't think there's really a one size fits all answer for this, you know, and that's part of the challenge. I think, especially in, you know, we're in the information age where we have access to more information than we've ever had access to before. And that's both a blessing and a curse. I think it can make it really difficult for a lot of people to be able to discern the truth. That being said, I think more than ever now, there's kind of a sense the facts don't matter to a lot of people. You know, I can do investigative stories all day and show you exactly how I got my information and where, and there are people who still won't believe it. You know, I think trust is in such short supply these days, and people just don't accept what the news is telling them as fact, like maybe they did in previous decades, previous generations.
Does that give you, I mean, does that make you despair? How hopeful are you about the future of journalism and an informed electorate.
Oh man, that's deep, John. I thought we were going to be talking about interviewing techniques. Man,
Yeah,
we're getting all philosophical here.
No, I'm doing the interview. Then
I know, man. You're good at this. Maybe you should do the interview techniques portion.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of the interviewee stalling for time.
Diversion. Okay, what was the question?
Really?
John, it was a multi-part question. So your interview subject gets confused. Which part of that question would you like me to answer?
All of them.
At once, with one sentence, 1 15-second soundbite.
I forgot my question.
Wow. Okay. Step 1 of interviewing people. Remember what question you asked.
Yeah.
That's number 1. Okay. I believe my recollection of your question was something along the lines
of, now you get to make up your own question.
Do I despair? Do I despair at the difficulty of discerning truth? And how do I feel about the future of television news or news in general?
And whether there'll be an informed electorate. I mean, you say people don't really accept facts anymore.
Yeah.
So, it's that lack of trust in the messenger. So, does that mean, do you see hope in spite of all this distrust?
I think it depends on the day, if we're being honest. I think that there are some days where I get really frustrated, where it feels like people just read the headline and make their decision about how they feel about the story simply from that, and then get in the comments and write all kinds of nasty personal things that have nothing to do with the story. And those days are really frustrating. That being said, I think there are also a lot of people out there who, especially during this pandemic, recognize that facts and accuracy are more important than ever and can save lives.
Give me an example of what kind of editorial oversight do you have? In terms of what goes on behind the scenes that helps you know that you've got an accurate story. I'm not phrasing the question very well, but I guess I'm asking about editorial oversight because the accuracy and truth is the gold standard. What are the mechanisms in place at your station that assure or at least guard against inaccuracy and untruths?
Sure. So I think that the more brains on a story, the better. So if there's an investigation I'm working on, I will involve one of our investigative producers. And so I bounce ideas off of her and we kind of look at the information together. I tell her, well, I think we should look at this. Here's this study I found. Here's where it came from. Oh, I found this government agency who works on this, and this is what they say about it. I did this public records request. Is there anything else I should be requesting? So I think just involving 2 investigative brains in the initial process and the development of the information and the seeking of the information. And then when it comes to script writing, I'll write the first draft of the story, and then I will send it to my investigative producer who's been working with me on gathering the information to review it. And she might say, this word is too editorial, or let's move this part up here, or I don't think we need this. And then after we discuss those changes, it'll get sent up another level. So then it'll get sent to the investigative executive producer or the managing editor, and then they'll look at it. Ultimately, it will be looked at by the news director once it's gone through all of those layers of protection. The video story itself gets looked at by a bunch of different eyeballs before it goes out.
Do lawyers get involved too?
Sometimes. If we think it's something that, that's a more serious piece, or, where there could be people who would be mad enough to try to put up a legal challenge, then we might get lawyers involved. But lawyers don't read all of my stories. It's just kind of on an as needed basis.
Okay. We actually have somebody on the chat who is raising a question, and I'm
Okay.
going to put it on the screen. I don't know if I can read it, but let me see. This is from Lanny. He's asking, would the guest advise if she is able to ascertain any difference in tone between the Wall Street Journal versus the New York Times, the political orientation in their news articles? And secondly, are you willing to publicly make such a value judgment against another news outlet, or does she have any institutional bias? I'll leave the question up there.
Institutional bias.
Well,
Oh.
I didn't write it. I'm just reading it here.
No, I think it's a good question, and I think it's a fair question. And the answer is that I personally don't feel comfortable sharing an opinion on what I believe to be the tone of the Wall Street Journal versus a New York Times. Because it's just, I mean, it's not my job to have an opinion. It's other people's jobs to see what to look at these things for themselves and evalluate and come to their own opinions, if that makes sense.
Well,
It
does. One of the things that
form opinion.
Some of the conversations I've had with people indicate that they feel that because the editorial page endorses a particular candidate, then the reporters are in lockstep with the newspaper's editorial page policies.
And that's,
I think,
are you
able to speak to that in general without specifics?
And I think that's also difficult. Why, as a TV and digital reporter, it's kind of difficult for me to make those value judgments on newspaper because we don't do editorial. We don't do anything like that. My understanding of how newspaper newsrooms work is that editorial and news are separate departments, that there isn't overlap. But as a TV and digital reporter, we just don't have that. And so it's difficult for me to assess any kind of intention there. One thing that I do want to say about outlets like Wall Street Journal and New York Times, while they make exceptions for certain articles, one thing that I personally don't agree with is a paywall for content.
What do you mean?
Well, so right now you have to have a subscription. You have to pay for a subscription for, I believe, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times to be able to access their information, to be able to see their articles past a certain point anyway. You might be able to see the first couple sentences, but to go beyond that, you have to pay. Now, there are some exceptions, I believe.
Well, but I mean, why should that be a problem? Because they got to make money. I mean, that's the same as subscribing to a hard copy.
Sure, and I understand that.
Be able to give it away, right?
Well, I mean, TV stations do, and a lot of online outlets do too. Personally, I don't think that there should be a barrier when it comes to access to information. That's my personal view on it. I'm sure there are a lot of people who disagree, and a lot of newspapers are struggling to stay alive. And if that's what they have to do to stay alive, I think it outweighs, the bad outweighs the good there. But if the goal is to give access to content and to facts, I just don't think that there should be any kind of barricade, especially any kind of financial hurdle to be able to get that information. I think that my preferred way of newsrooms making money would be through ads. Don't charge the consumer of the content, charge the people who want to access those consumers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, and one of the things that I've observed over the years is that, local television doesn't always really make an investment in investigative reporting. I mean, you could argue that investigative reporter is redundant. All reporters are supposedly investigators, but
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true.
It's certainly changed because, I mean, a lot of local news is if it bleeds, it leads. And that's not the kind of stuff you do. And are you, in a sense, and what your station is doing, is that the exception to the rule, or are we seeing more investigative journalism at the local level?
I wouldn't say it's the exception to the rule, but that being said, I mean, Tampa Bay is a larger market. A lot of the medium and smaller markets don't have the resources to be able to devote somebody or a whole team of people like it is at my station, don't have the resources to devote that to investigative journalism. Investigative journalism is, there's not always that instant payoff. You're not getting a story out every day out of investigative journalists. It takes time to gather and vet and build sources and kind of do the digging that's necessary to produce an investigative journalistic piece. And for small newsrooms where maybe you only have two or three full-time reporters, that's just out of the question.
Sure. And you've worked in other TV newsrooms, and if I'm not mistaken, there were times when you had to turn, a couple of stories a day, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the case for when I was a general assignment reporter, I think that's the case for a lot of general assignment reporters around the country right now. There's just the constant demand for more content. My last station in Jacksonville, I was on most days turning 2 stories about 2 different things for TV and digital and social. And it's a lot. It's a grind, but there's a balance. Yes, that's a lot of work, but the newscast had so much content. If you were watching and you weren't that into one of the stories, you knew something else was going to be coming right up and it was going to be different. And you knew you were getting different content from newscast to newscast. So there's a reason to watch the 5 o'clock, the 5:30, and the 6, because you're going to be getting totally different stories. And so there's a cost to that, and there's a benefit.
Well, and it's all about ratings, and ratings determine how much people can charge, the stations can charge advertisers. And so how much of the profit motive factors into the stuff that's covered?
I don't know many people in the newsroom who really look at it that way. Journalists don't make any more money based on whether or not our ratings are good, whether or not the ratings are good during our story or during the newscasts that we're typically in. We don't see a direct financial benefit when the ratings go up. So, and I mean, most of us are on contract. So, what we're making for the next several years has already been determined. And I think that's good because it provides a buffer. People sometimes will accuse reporters of, oh, you're just trying to get good ratings, or you're trying to, you want to make money off of the ratings. Well, reporters don't make money off of the ratings.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the stuff that you're doing, you host a show on YouTube called
Yes.
What's Brewing. And so these are investigative pieces. What's the general length of these pieces?
Yeah, so these are some of the longest stories that I have ever gotten to do, which is really exciting because on TV you have such limited time in each newscast. You have to be thinking about things like, oh, we've got to get weather in, we've got to get sports in, we've got to get these commercial breaks in at these times. And so only pieces of certain length can run at certain places in the newscast. On YouTube, that is all out the window. And so I've been able to do stories that are as much as 9 minutes long, which I'm telling you is unheard of. Stories at my last station in Jacksonville, the typical story was 1 minute and 10 seconds for a reporter.
Yeah. Oh, I got into an argument with an assignment editor. We had 90 seconds to tell the story, and I went 95 seconds. And I mean, we had this screaming argument. So are we going to quibble about 5 seconds? And he goes,
yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And then you became that person who did that to people, John.
I did. Sorry. So you've got a long time to tell these stories. How long do you have to turn the story? How often do you have to file?
Yeah. So originally we were doing it every week. We were coming out with a new episode every week. Now we're doing every 2 weeks is our goal. And the reason I wanted to make that change was I just felt like I wasn't having enough time to really do the digging that I wanted to do. And when I came to my management with that and I said, I think that we should do it every 2 weeks instead of every week so I can do better content, they were totally on board with it. And now that we've been doing it for a while, there are pieces where, the most recent story I did, I've been working on and off for about 4 months. So
you have more, you're working on more than one at a time, right?
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Is that a yes?
Yeah. I worked on probably 4 different ones just today. It's just a constant juggling act, which was just what you have to do. I mean, that's what you have to do as an investigative reporter. You don't do one story for one day and then move on to something the next day, which is the beauty of it. You can really wait until they're ready. It's not, okay, it's 5 o'clock, now it's got to be on TV. You can really wait and give it the time it needs.
Let's give people just a taste of what it is you do. I have to. This is where you get the real glimpse behind the scenes. I mean, you're very polished, and you know how to produce. I mean, I'm the guest booker. I'm the technical director. I'm the font operator, and now we're going to roll the videotape. And so this is going to take a while, and it's probably going to be kind of raggedy. But
roll the videotape.
Oh, stop! Yes. So I want to give people a sense of what it is you do, and so I am going. Let's see. Here we go. I'm going to do that one, and I want to share the audio. And so this is the beginning of one of your pieces. We won't watch the whole thing, but we'll watch to see how you get into it.
Okay.
Oh, I got to roll. Oh, we'll just sit on this shot for a while.
I won't tell you what its pandemic plan was for schools because it's a fire hazard. A fire hazard. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But that's one of the stranger examples of public records responses we've gotten during this pandemic. And public records are about transparency. Anyone can request them, and they can tell you who commissioners were texting after last night's council meeting, who makes the most overtime in the state, or why a certain police officer got fired. At the end of the day, taxpayers pay government workers' salaries, and you at home have a right to know what's going on. Let's take a deep dive into how this pandemic is affecting your right to know what your own government is up to. Let's see what's brewing. I'm Jenna Bourne, and I'm an investigative reporter with 10 Tampa Bay.
And we'll stop there. That's pretty impressive. Tell me a little bit more about the, whoops, what do I want to do here? I want to stop the screen share. So I've got a lot of questions, and probably the most relevant one, let's say, has to do with the fact that this is not your typical TV news report, because you're not an automaton. You're not this, you're not just, this is the news, these are the facts. You're showing personality, and you've got a great personality. But,
oh, thanks.
Well, I'm biased. That's my bias. But I'm thinking that probably 20 years ago, that would have been considered journalistic heresy.
Yeah, well, and I think even today, there's a lot of ideas people have about what reporters are supposed to sound like and look like. And there are a lot of ideas reporters have about that too. I think a lot of it's internal. You see reporters talking a certain way your entire life, and then when you become a reporter, you try to talk like them. I did it. And one of my recent goals over the past year or so has been to try to get away from that kind of news bot delivery as much as possible. And I found that this YouTube series, which I started probably four months ago, has really helped me break away from kind of that standard, news bot cadence in my delivery. And I think that is hugely important to the future of news, that more people try to do this, that they focus on trying to sound like what they think a reporter is supposed to sound like, and just be themselves, be authentic. I think people identify with that a lot more. They want to hear from you more if they feel like they're hearing from a real person, and not just like a news bot.
A news bot. Okay, fair enough. How can people find this? I have it up on the screen. It's what's the deeper dive?
So the deeper dive. So the YouTube channel is called The Deeper Dive, and that is where you can find my series, What's Brewing. If you search what's brewing, you might not find it. If you search the deeper dive and go to that channel, you will. Right now, what's brewing is the only series that's on that channel. But in the future, there may be more series there, which is why we didn't just call it What's Brewing. The Deeper Dive is my TV station's second YouTube channel. So this channel is meant to house new series like this, where we're going to be taking these kind of deeper dives, hence the name, into issues, things that you won't see on TV, or that maybe you'll see a shorter version of on TV.
Well, that was my question. Does any of this stuff actually show up on WTSP?
Yes, yeah. So I'll always do kind of a short version that teases to the YouTube video for TV to just kind of have that cross promotion. But also, I think that we want to go more in the direction of having content on TV that looks and feels like digital. I think that that's really important to, that's what so many people in my generation are used to consuming. And that's the format that we're comfortable with, and that how we want to get our content.
Because really, most people, I don't know, most is maybe the wrong way of saying it, but people are now getting their news on their phone. People aren't really sitting in front of TV news as much anymore. And on their computer? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I think that the way that a lot of people want to encounter news is changing. Whereas before, I think people would get out the newspaper and read it, turn on the TV for appointment television to watch the 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news. I just don't think a lot of people do that anymore, especially the younger generations. They want to encounter news on their social feeds. And so one of our big goals with What's Brewing and the YouTube series is to meet people where they're at. People are already on YouTube looking for content. Why not be there when they're looking for that?
Okay, so let's switch gears, because the way I was able to entice you to come onto this program is we're going to talk about interviewing. And
I was wondering when we were going to get to that.
You're a master interviewer, and one of the things that, well, in the writing classes I teach, I really try to equip people with how to stir up their own curiosity to get to know other people. And because any writer who is in any way engaged with another person is going, if they're asking questions, then they're not talking, they're listening. And when you're listening, you're learning. And that's the way you find out about the other people. And a lot of writers are shy or introverts or both. And I'm sort of I guess I would describe myself as a shy extrovert with introvert tendencies.
Okay.
Bottom line is, often in a social situation, it's like, well, what do I say? Well, I finally figured out I don't have to say anything. I just ask a question. Then the focus is off me. And I found that people love to talk about themselves, and I love to learn about people. So, and one of the things that, and so writers have to do research interviews. And so, I think being curious is a fundamental skill set for, I think, not just being a writer. It's obviously number one for journalists, but I think it's just part of being a person, because if we are reaching out and trying to learn about other people, that has the potential of building understanding instead of just lobbing rhetorical artillery shells into the enemy camp. So one of the things that in our conversations privately, one of the things that I learned from you really was the dynamics of, in a sense, interviewing the grieving widow, which every reporter has had to do. And they hate the job, but you seem to, I don't know, relish is not the right word, because that's just an awful situation no matter what, but you're good at it. And so what is your approach when, reporters have a lot of people perceive reporters as being vultures, you just go after the bad news, but you have a more human attitude and approach to that. And I'd like you to share that.
Well, I
in
think
terms of how you approach those interviews?
Yeah, I think it's just, first of all, the empathy piece of this is so big. And just remembering that these people are not tools for your story. They're not sound bites. This story doesn't go away for them when the newscast airs. This is there forever. So, and this is their real lives. So I think that perspective is so important when you're going into an interview like that. And I would say my biggest piece of advice for interviewing, 90% of your success is just making the person feel comfortable. If you don't make the person that you're interviewing feel comfortable, then they are not going to be able to give you the best answers to your questions. They're not going to feel comfortable opening up to you. They're not going to want to emote. They're not going to want to, they don't trust if they don't feel comfortable. And that is so key.
So how do you go about getting a person to feel comfortable on the worst day of their life?
Yeah, and it's such a challenge, and it is so much just kind of about reading them in that moment, because different people react to terrible things happening differently. And so it's so much about really kind of paying attention to them and how they're feeling, how they're reacting, how they're talking, and kind of following their lead. Do they need to go slow? Do you need to start with, kind of the questions that have not much to do with the emotional situation that just happened, just some basic informational stuff to kind of warm them up and get them feel comfortable talking. And I think also just making sure they realize that you're really listening, and not just listening for sound bites, but really listening to what they're saying. And one way I like to do that is by repeating information back to them before I move on to the next question.
Give me an example of what you mean.
Sure. So, I might say, just a moment ago, you said such and such. I want to hear more about that. Can you tell me more? Rather than just, so that's a question that you can't know in advance. You can't have that written down on your notepad, ready to ask them. If you're just reading questions off your notepad, they know you're not listening to them. And if you're not listening, why are they talking to you?
Let me interject something right here, because we're talking about journalism and getting the story. But one of the people I interviewed before you and I talked, Lowell Mays, he used to inform next of kin after, fatal accidents, murders, stuff like that. And he said some of the same things you did in terms of reading the person, and even though the job he had and the job you have, there's a certain professionalism that's involved. But what I'm hearing are really techniques that anyone can use when they are with someone who's grieving, because that's probably, people want to be able to be comforting. They want to be able to help, but they don't want to say something stupid. And I think what I'm hearing you say is it's really not about you saying anything. It's letting them do the saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also people misunderstand that in an interview or even in a conversation, that you need to be ready to fire off the next question. They're uncomfortable with silence. And so sometimes just giving people a moment to let the moment breathe, they might start talking again. They might have more to say. Sometimes people just need a moment to collect themselves. And so I think silence in conversations is actually really important. And also, not every question has to really be a question. So I did an interview today where I felt like half of my questions were statements, because I just kind of want to prompt them to say what's on their mind rather than me guiding them to say a certain thing. So I might say something back to them like, well, it sounds like what you're telling me is blah. Or, well, it's my understanding that, for example, today I did an interview about organ donation. So I think one of the things I said today was, so my understanding is that living donors, those are elective surgeries, but deceased donors, those can't wait. And so I kind of wanted him to speak to that topic, but that wasn't a question. That was just like kind of a, well, this is my understanding of what this is. And then people who are an expert on that are going to jump in and be like, yes, and here's why. So I think that sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that they constantly need to be questioning people. And I think that that can feel more like an interrogation rather than a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Did you learn interviewing in college or in journalism school, or is this just something you innately understand, or you learn through trial and error? How did you come to these insights?
Yeah, it's not, I mean, there were some interviewing techniques I learned in college. You know, don't ask yes or no questions, especially if you're talking to a child.
Yes. Then you only get yes or no
yes
answers.
Yes or no answers. Yep. Try not to ask the
But you do want to ask.
Question.
You want to ask politicians yes or no questions.
Absolutely, right? And we'll get to that in a second, because there are I would say 3 different main categories of interviews. But you know, to answer your first question, John, about what I learned in school versus out in the field, you know, you can teach people the basics of don't ask yes or no questions. Don't ask multi-part questions, because then people don't know which one to answer. John,
oh, like I do.
John DeDakis, but I think so much of it just has to be out in the field. It's totally different when you're like in a classroom talking conceptually about these things, and when you are talking to someone who's just lost a loved one or a politician. It's a total learning curve. And I think so much of it is just kind of figuring out what your style is, and being there, being present as a person during the interview, not being a reporter bot.
So what are the 3 categories of categories of questions? Is that what?
Yes, that's a great follow-up, John. I'd be happy to answer that. So the 3, this is some of the best advice I ever got.
Okay, I'm going away now, Jenna. You're on your own.
Good. So there are 3 main interview categories: the emotional interview, the informational interview, and the accountability interview. And you are going to approach those in totally different ways. And so before approaching an interview, or if you're using this practically, maybe a tough conversation or an emotional conversation or an important conversation, you first want to figure out what the goal of the interview is. So let's take the organ donation story that I did some interviews for today. So today I did 2 informational interviews. These are with experts, and you're really just looking for context and perspective about the topic. And so I'm not going to be asking a lot of questions like, well, how did that make you feel? I'm going to be asking questions looking to get specific information and looking to get context. Now, there's always, I think, going to be a little bit of crossover between them. So at the end, I might throw in a question like, man, what has COVID been like for you as, you know, somebody who focuses on organ transplants? You know, what's been going through your mind these past few months? But that's going to be probably something at the end. And with the informational interviews, a lot of times those people, they won't really give you that much with those kinds of questions. They're there to give you the information, and they know it. But with the emotional interviews, you know, I might start out with 1 or 2 questions that are more informational, just to kind of get them warmed up and get them feel, again, comfortable talking. But they're not answers I really need for the story, because generally, like the first couple of answers, people are nervous, or they've kind of got their talking points. They know what they want to get across to you. And so no matter what you ask them, they're going to answer that way. Politicians are especially good at this. But so I'll start out an emotional interview with maybe a couple of informational questions. Let's say I'm interviewing a grieving widow. I might ask, you know, hey, so tell me a little bit about, you know, your family. How many kids do you have together? Where did you meet? And so those are more informational things. But I'm not going to come right out the bat with, how did you feel when your husband died? You know, that's just, it comes off as insensitive, obviously. And, you know, you're just not going to get a good response out of them if you just come up against them like that with the hard stuff right away.
Let me ask more about we'll get to the accountability interview in a minute, but let's just pause here for a second on the emotional interview, because I mean, my mom was the kind of person who said, oh, stay away. These camera people are right in the faces of all these, grieving widows. And it made her uncomfortable because she was an introvert. She was very quiet and private. And so I guess the question I'm asking is, why bother? Why is it important to do those kinds of interviews? Because some people don't want to talk about it. And it's not like you're trying to force people to do something they don't want to do.
Not for emotional interviews. No, absolutely not. And I'm so glad that you asked that, because I do think that this is a misunderstanding that a lot of people have about journalists. Like, why are you pushing people who have just, been through a school shooting or, experienced the loss of a loved one? Why are you pushing them to talk right away? Or at all? And the answer to that is the public doesn't truly understand the impact of an event unless they can hear from somebody who was affected by it. And that's why that is so important. Now, some people might not want to talk, and that is okay. We are not entitled to their grief. But for some people, they find it cathartic. Some people feel like it's a sense of giving a voice to the voiceless. People want the public to know how they feel about maybe a terrible thing that happened.
In your opinion, where do most people fall? On the side of the catharsis or on the side of leave me the hell alone?
I don't think that there's a most people line. I think it's just a case by case basis. Some people, no matter what it is, they're not going to want to talk to you. And some people, they want to be heard. That is part of their healing, is spreading a message about what happened.
Here's another, again, I just thought of this now because we've been in the middle of the Black Lives movement, and there's so much racial strife going on. And so arguably, and this is almost a hypothetical question, but one of the kinds of interviews in a case like this is, let's say, the family of a person, an African-American who was killed by the police. And as awful as that experience is for the grieving family, these are also controversial. And so how do you approach it in terms of wanting to help people understand the emotional impact of this, but at the same time, allowing a certain degree of skepticism in terms of the facts of the case? Maybe this was a person who was carrying an assault weapon, on a street trying to keep the peace, and, gets killed in the process. So, there are serious questions that can be raised about why the hell was he there in the first place. I'm sort of conflating a lot of different things, but the point is there room for accountability questions? We haven't gotten to that yet, but is there room for accountability questions within an emotional interview?
I think that there can be, and when it's appropriate, I usually try to frame it so it doesn't come off as adversarial or personal. I try to frame it as something like, well, what do you say to people who question, hey, what about this thing? And I find that gets a more genuine response and a more informative response than if you just say, what about this thing? Mm-hmm. Because then they're on the defensive rather than trying to explain their position.
Got it. Okay. Well, let's go to the accountability. Was there more you wanted to say about the emotional interview?
I think we covered it pretty well. I would love to talk about the accountability interview.
Yeah, that's your favorite. That's your specialty. Okay, have fun with it.
Yeah. So the accountability interview. This is when you are trying to. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's when you're trying to hold someone accountable, usually a politician or a leader, a government official. And this is a totally different approach than an emotional or informational interview, because first of all, with an accountability interview, a lot of the time you don't know how much time you're going to have. There is a high likelihood that it is going to end quickly. Either they are going to head out a back door, or they're going to get in their car and drive off. So whereas I will never ask my most important question first in an emotional or informational interview, I will always ask my most important question first in an accountability interview, because sometimes it is all you get.
This is a perfect place to give an example of what it is we're talking about from one of your more recent pieces. You know which one I'm going to roll, so why don't you set it up, and then we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good example because, as I mentioned earlier during our interview, I don't do gotcha questions. You are going to see me coming a mile away, and this was one of those situations where I had been asking for months for the Florida Department of Education to allow me to interview the education commissioner about the department's refusal to release its pandemic plan for schools. They claimed that they had a plan for pandemics before COVID-19 hit, but they refused to release it to the public. So who knows what was in the plan? Who knows how helpful it actually was when COVID hit? Nobody in the public knows because the state won't release it. And so I wanted to ask the education commissioner about why he felt that that plan should not be made public. And they didn't respond to my multiple interview requests over a month. So the education commissioner showed up at a news conference that the governor was holding that I went to try to ask the governor some questions. I saw the education commissioner there, and I was like, ding, ding, ding. Now is the time. Now is the time to try to talk to him.
Okay, so let's set it up here. This is another great screenshot. That
yes,
we won't.
Only the most attractive faces.
Florida Department of Education didn't respond to my multiple requests to interview Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran. So I tried to snag him before one of the governor's news events in Tampa.
You want to get me right after, it'd be better.
Right after?
Yeah.
Are you still going to be around?
Yeah, I'll be around.
I tried to ask the governor about it too. Governor, the Florida Department of Education is refusing to release its pandemic plan. We've been asking for 3 months. Don't you think the public has a right to know what was in the plan?
You want to take that?
Governor, I'd like to say about that as well.
You've reached out to us several times. My office has communicated with you very clearly that the pandemic plan, in it is what we strategize on how to keep our school children safe, and it is not a public record. And if you'd like, we'll get you the statute, we'll get you the general counsel.
You've been citing a fire safety plan, sir, a security and fire safety plan.
It's about school safety, and it's about protecting children.
After the news conference wrapped, Corcoran walked out a side door. He's walking out. Mr. Corcoran, you said you'd answer a couple questions for me? Mr. Corcoran, don't you think that the public has a right to know about their plans for schools? Mr. Corcoran, you're not going to answer our questions?
I answer all your questions. Every single time, I always answer your question.
Then why are you driving away, sir? The next day, I talked to Senator Manny Diaz.
And so it goes. God, I mean, they purposely probably try to make you look like you're scrambling. And so what was it like to be you in those moments that we saw?
Well, I was a little out of breath, if we're being honest. I mean, I was wearing that mask. It was hot. It's Florida. No, I mean, there have been people who I've literally run after, and that it's not that kind of story. I wasn't going to run after Richard Corcoran. But I'm just hoping he's going to answer the question, frankly. They keep trying to divert to this issue where they claim it's a security. It's exempt from public records laws because it's a security issue. And what is the virus going to find out what your plans are and change its behavior because it knows what's in your written document? I can see that. For certainly we don't want to release anything that would help a school shooter know what the security plan is for a school, but that's not what we're asking for. We're asking what the Department of Education's plan was if a pandemic were to hit. how prepared were they? What was the plan supposed to be? And they keep citing this security and fire safety exemption. And so he tried to throw that out there during the news conference, trying to make it look like I'm not educated about the topic, and, oh, we've gotten back to you multiple times. Yeah, you've gotten back to me multiple times telling me you won't give me the information and citing this security and fire safety issue. So, it's just about being ready. It's about being prepared and being knowledgeable about the topic and being ready for that kind of pushback. And when he said that, I was prepared with, sir, you've been citing a fire and security plan exemption. You have to anticipate what they're going to throw back at you.
It's interesting. We've actually kind of come full circle, because at the beginning we were talking about transparency. And in this particular example, we saw the lack of transparency. And I guess my question is, why you seem to relish these kinds of not interviews, but the idea of accountability. And I guess my question is, what, based on the experience that you've got as a reporter over the last 10 years or so, what's your assessment in terms of the willingness for public officials to be accountable?
Well, again, I know I keep saying this, but it's really a case-by-case basis. There are some public officials who really do value transparency and are very forthcoming with public information. And that's how it should be. As taxpayers, we pay their salaries, we pay for the public records to be maintained, we pay the people who are supposed to make those public records public. We already pay for all that. Taxpayers already pay for all that to happen. And so when you block access to that information that the public is entitled to, I believe that you deserve to be held accountable for that.
Let me ask one. You've been very generous with your time, and you and I could go on for hours.
It's a pandemic. Time is a construct. It's meaningless. I spent half a day thinking it was Wednesday.
One of the things that I do a lot of speaking, and I talk about fake news, and I try to give people an understanding of what goes on. And one of the things that gets thrown at me every now and then is somebody will say, well, you can just tell that reporter is biased by the way they're asking the question or the way they're phrasing the question. They're just trying to stick it to that guy. And I guess my question to you is, are they? I mean,
I think that is sometimes a fair criticism. I do. I think you see it more frequently on network news than you do in local news. But it's a fine line, because did I go into the unscheduled interview with the education commissioner with a goal? Yes, the goal was to get an answer to the question about why not make this information public. So certainly reporters go into interviews with goals. I think that's fair and it makes sense. If you want to call that an agenda, you can call that an agenda, but the agenda is to find truth and get facts. But I do think that, I have seen interviews where it seems like the reporter is trying to steer in a certain direction or trying to make a point. I don't think that that's an unfair observation or an unwarranted one. It does happen.
Okay.
But I think so much of it, I do want to say just one more thing on that, John. I think so much of it is tone also. And this has been a learning curve for me as well. I mean, when I was younger and I was doing these accountability interviews, one big piece of feedback that I got was that I seemed angry. The truth was I was just nervous for a lot of them, but it came off as angry. And I can see why. And especially as a young woman who's asking tough questions, that is not always palatable to people. So I in that moment, remember being mad about that. Well, they just think I'm angry because I'm a young woman asking tough questions. And then, you have to do a little soul searching and figure out, well, how do I respond to that? And for me, the answer was to kind of check my ego at the door and recognize that there could be some validity to that I do need to watch my tone. I'm not going to change the kinds of questions I ask. I will always ask tough questions. tough but fair questions, but doing it in a tone that is comes off as less angry and more just trying to get the information, I think makes a big difference in how people perceive the same question. And I think that's fair. I mean, you hear me say in there, then why are you driving away, sir? I think using those titles of respect is important. I do that a lot in my accountability interviews. I will ask sir, I will ask ma'am, because I am trying to maintain a level of respect and decorum. And if someone goes off the handle during an accountability interview, it's not going to be me.
Wow. Well, you're a very interesting person. We were talking with Jenna
That's the
Bourne.
nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
Well, it's downhill from here. Jenna's an investigative reporter with 10 Tampa Bay, WTSP, the CBS affiliate in Tampa Bay, Florida. And she is the host of What's Brewing. It's an investigative report, I guess,
YouTube series.
YouTube, as I said, YouTube series. And you can find it on The Deeper Dive on YouTube, and then look for What's Brewing.
Yeah, I mean, right now all the videos on The Deeper Dive are all What's Brewing episodes, but it may not always be that way.
Okay. Well, you're a fascinating person, and I'm so glad we met. And you're one of the reasons that I write these LARC books. So I want to be able to. I'll need your feedback on the next one as well. But
I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. Anything else you want to add? Well, wait a minute. There's somebody on the comment thing. Let me just make sure it's. Oh, there is a question. I haven't really pre-screened this, so this could. I don't think there'll be any profanity, but if there is, so be it. Why do you think the governor gave way to the education commissioner during your question? Was it an indication for you to get the information using another route, or was he just ducking it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know what's in the governor's mind. I don't want to accuse him of trying to duck it, but I think he passed it off to the person who would be the most knowledgeable about what I was asking. I doubt I don't know if the governor was super familiar with what I was talking about. And so he may have felt that he was not the right person to answer that, and that the education commissioner, who happened to be right there, was. So that's why my assessment of why he passed off the question to Mr. Corcoran.
Okay. Well, as I say, we could go on and on. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, but that's always actually, yes. The question you just asked is the question that I always end interviews with.
Do you really?
Yeah, something along the lines of, well, those are all the questions I had. Is there anything you want to talk about that you feel like we haven't covered? And it's almost always the best soundbite. Well,
all right. So what's the best soundbite here? What am I missing here?
Oh, man. No, so the problem is I know that trick.
Oh. Well, maybe we'll do this again sometime, but you could teach this class. And I keep learning when I talk to you.
You too, John.